Keanu stood outside the sleek glass doors of the high-end car dealership, the cool breeze doing little to numb the sting on his face. The manager had just shoved him out, the punch still echoing in his ears. It wasn't supposed to go this way. He'd simply come to ask a few questions about a car. But the manager's attitude had been dismissive from the start, too eager to get rid of him, assuming Keanu didn't have the means to even step inside a place like this. Is this what the world's come to? Keanu muttered under his breath, wiping the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. He had faced much worse in his life, never as a victim, but sometimes, life had a way of turning things upside down. He wasn't bothered by the punch itself, it was the principle of it. He'd lived a life of humility, always respecting others, never boasting about what he had. But the world, it was different now. It didn't seem to value kindness, or respect for that matter. Keanu slowly stood up and wiped off his shirt, the gesture simple but filled with a deep resolve. The manager had no idea who he was, or rather, what he was capable of. His wealth wasn't something Keanu wore on his sleeve, but it was there, and perhaps that was the problem. People often judged him for his quiet demeanor, assuming he was just another faceless, nameless guy trying to get by. Keanu turned back toward the dealership. Inside, the manager was busy showing off a car to a customer, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Keanu's expression remained calm, but his mind was already working through a plan, one that would reveal not just his influence but his values as well. He walked back inside with the same unhurried pace he always maintained, his steps purposefully slow. The manager noticed him immediately, his face a mix of surprise and confusion. "What are you doing back here?" he sneered. "I just realized something," Keanu replied, his voice low and steady. "I don't think you understand what kind of person I am. But it's time you found out." The manager scoffed. "Are you trying to intimidate me, old man?" "No," Keanu said, stepping forward. "But I will show you something that might just change your perspective." At that moment, Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, which flashed an urgent message. "It's time," he thought to himself. He smiled faintly, his eyes meeting the manager's with an intensity that spoke of more than just power. It was a promise of consequence. The dealership manager stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Keanu's calmness in the face of everything was unsettling. But then, as if the universe had decided to intervene, the door opened. Two men in suits walked in, their presence undeniable. "Mr. Reeves," one of them said, shaking his hand, "we've been trying to reach you. We have an urgent matter to discuss regarding the ownership of this dealership." The manager's face drained of color. He was about to say something, but words failed him. His eyes darted between Keanu and the two suited men, the confusion in his face morphing into panic. Keanu, meanwhile, stood perfectly composed, as if this was just another ordinary day in his life. The truth had come crashing down. Keanu didn't just own this place, he owned many places. This wasn't a man who had been kicked out of a dealership for being an average Joe. No, this was Keanu Reeves, a man of quiet power, watching how society's perceptions often led people to make foolish assumptions. The manager's world was about to change. But not in the way he expected. The manager tried to stammer something, his face a mixture of disbelief and desperation, but Keanu simply raised his hand, signaling for him to stop. There was no need for words anymore. The moment had shifted. The man was no longer the center of attention. Keanu, with all his quiet grace, was. Keanu turned his attention back to the two men in suits. They weren't here to fix this. They were here to show the world the truth. One of the men handed him a folder, sealed tightly with a company logo. The manager's eyes locked onto it as Keanu opened it slowly, the contents revealing pages of contracts, documents, and the unmistakable sign of ownership. The dealership was, in fact, Keanu's, a silent partner in a vast network of businesses he had invested in over the years. Keanu glanced up at the manager, whose face had gone pale. "You had no idea, did you?" Keanu's voice was calm, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The manager opened his mouth, his voice shaky. I didn't know. I thought you were just a regular guy who wanted to buy a car." Keanu smirked softly. "And that's the problem, isn't it? We live in a world where people like you assume others are beneath them." It's easy to overlook someone when they don't fit the mold you've set for success. But there's more to every story, more beneath the surface. The manager looked down at the floor, his hands shaking as he tried to grasp the situation. I'm sorry. I never meant to. I know. Keanu interrupted him gently, his expression unreadable. It's not about what you meant. It's about what's real. And you need to understand this. The power you have over people can be used for good or bad. You chose bad. Keanu turned back to the men in suits, his next words directed at them. Sell this place. Donate the proceeds to charities that support those who need help, not just the ones that line your pockets. The suits nodded, making notes on their tablets. The manager's heart sank as he realized that he had been caught in a trap of his own making. His arrogance had cost him everything. But the story wasn't over. Keanu didn't leave with just his victory. He turned back to the manager one last time, his gaze intense but not unkind. This is your chance to change. Redemption is not easy, but it's possible. Use this moment wisely. The manager stared at him, speechless. Keanu could see it in his eyes, the realization that his actions had consequences, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could be the one to make a difference in his own life. Keanu didn't expect an immediate change. People didn't evolve that quickly. But he believed in the possibility of transformation, and he had just given this man the first step toward it. As Keanu walked out of the dealership, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had made his point, but it was the manager who now had to figure out what to do with his own choices. Keanu didn't care about the wealth or the titles that came with his hidden influence. What mattered was the ripple effect he created, the spark of change that began with a simple act of kindness and continued with a lesson in humility. The world wasn't perfect. Keanu knew that better than anyone. But if there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that sometimes, the greatest power wasn't in the money or the fame. It was in the ability to inspire others to see beyond their prejudices and change the way they viewed the world. And in that, he had already won. The air outside was cool and crisp as Keanu stepped into his car, the soft hum of the engine a calming contrast to the storm inside the dealership. He had done what he needed to do. He had set things in motion, and now, it was up to the manager to decide which path he'd take. Keanu had seen too many people crumble under the weight of their pride, but there was always a flicker of hope for those who were willing to change. As he drove through the city, his thoughts were interrupted by a call. The number was unknown, but something told him it was important. He answered the phone, his voice steady, though curiosity lingered in his tone. Keanu, the voice on the other end said, a mix of urgency and respect. We've been following your involvement with the dealership. We need to talk. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. This wasn't just another fan or an ordinary inquiry, it was someone who knew more than they let on. He remained silent for a moment before responding. About what exactly? Keanu asked, the calm in his voice masking the suspicion building inside him. About your next move. We've been keeping an eye on the impact you've been making. There are forces at play, and you have a unique opportunity to reshape the way business is done. It's bigger than you think. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he processed the words. He had been quietly helping people, shifting the balance of power in small ways, but he had never imagined his actions would be attracting attention from such powerful entities. And what's your interest in all of this? We believe you have the potential to lead a movement. A shift toward a more responsible way of doing business, one that benefits the people, not just the corporations. You've already taken the first step. But now, it's time for you to consider what comes next. Keanu's heart beat a little faster as the weight of the conversation began to sink in. A movement, lead. This was more than just about helping one person or making a difference in one dealership, it was about shifting the tide on a much larger scale. He took a deep breath. I've never sought power or fame. I just want to do what's right. If this is part of that, then I'll listen. But I won't be used. Of course, the voice replied smoothly. But think carefully. The world is changing, Keanu. People like you, people who understand the importance of kindness, empathy, and the greater good, are needed now more than ever. Keanu's thoughts were a blur. He had always kept his head down, focused on the quiet impact he could have. But this was different. His mind raced with the possibilities. Could he really lead such a change? Could he shift the power dynamics in a world that seemed so entrenched in greed and inequality? What's the next step? Keanu asked, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Meet us tomorrow. We'll explain everything. The choice will be yours. As the call ended, Keanu felt the world around him shift. For years, he had played a quiet role, making a difference where he could. But now, he stood at a crossroads, and the decision ahead of him would change everything, not just for him, but for the world. As he drove on, the skyline of the city stretching out before him, Keanu's mind went back to the manager. The man had been so certain, so full of himself. He had thought his actions had no consequences, that his judgment was infallible. But Keanu had shown him that the world was bigger than one man's assumptions, and now, it was his turn to face a world far larger than the one he had known. Tomorrow, he would make a choice that could either remain in the shadows or bring him into the light. A choice that could push him further into the battle against a broken system or leave him as just another quiet observer. But Keanu wasn't one to sit on the sidelines for long, and deep down, he knew that what was coming next would be the most significant moment of his life. The next day arrived with a weight in the air that Keanu could feel even before he stepped out of his apartment. The streets were bustling with their usual chaos, but for him, everything felt suspended in time. He had made his decision the night before, but now, as he prepared for this meeting, the magnitude of it settled in. Keanu drove to the location given to him by the mysterious caller, a sleek, anonymous building in the heart of the city. It was the kind of place that looked ordinary from the outside, glass and steel, clean lines, and high-tech, yet something about it exuded power. As he parked, a man in a black suit approached him, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Mr. Reeves, this way," the man said, leading Keanu inside. The interior was minimalistic, almost sterile, and they walked through a series of corridors before reaching a large, open conference room. At the table sat a group of people, all impeccably dressed, their faces serious. They didn't seem surprised to see him, but there was an intensity to their gaze that made Keanu feel like he was being sized up. He took a seat at the end of the table, meeting their eyes one by one. The tension in the room was palpable, yet Keanu remained calm. He had been in high-pressure situations before, but this felt different. The woman at the head of the table finally spoke, her voice smooth but commanding. "Keanu, we've been watching you. We know about your investments, your actions, your influence. And we believe you're exactly what the world needs right now." Keanu's expression didn't change. He'd heard words like this before, promises of greatness, of being part of something bigger. But the last few weeks had shown him how quickly that could turn into manipulation. "I don't seek power or fame," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "What I've done quietly, with no expectation of reward." The woman smiled faintly, a knowing smile. "We're not asking you to chase fame, Keanu. We're offering you a chance to lead a movement that will reshape the way business operates, a movement built on empathy, fairness, and social responsibility." Keanu listened intently, but his mind was already moving ahead. There was something in her tone, something calculated. "And what do you gain from this?" he asked, his voice low. The room was silent for a moment before the man in the suit beside the woman spoke. "We gain nothing, Keanu. This is about the world. It's about changing the rules of the game. We have the resources, the power to back you, but only if you're willing to lead. We believe you're the only one who can challenge the systems that have kept people like you on the sidelines for so long." Keanu's mind raced. This was bigger than anything he had anticipated. It wasn't just about a single business deal or even his past actions. This was about creating a legacy, a chance to break down the walls that had been built up over centuries, walls of greed, inequality, and corruption. But as much as he could feel the weight of this opportunity, he also felt a pang of caution. Was this truly the right path? Could he really trust these people? Or were they simply trying to use him, to push their own agenda while pretending to care about the greater good? The woman leaned forward slightly, sensing his hesitation. "We know you're wary, but consider this. You've already changed one life. Imagine what could happen if you change thousands, millions. You have the platform, the influence, and the heart to do it. All we need is for you to lead with us." Keanu stayed silent, processing everything. The choice before him wasn't just about power or influence, it was about doing what was right. It was about fighting for something bigger than himself. For a moment, he thought back to that moment with the bank manager, the way he had seen a flicker of hope in the man's eyes after everything had unraveled. Keanu had helped him see the world differently, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could do the same for the world at large. But there was a catch. There always was. He would have to step into the spotlight, expose himself in ways he never had before. No more quiet acts behind the scenes. If he accepted this offer, everything would change. He took a deep breath and leaned forward. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "But on one condition." The room fell silent again, waiting for his next words. "I do this my way," he said firmly. "No strings attached. No manipulation. If I'm going to lead this, it's going to be built on trust, not on power games." The woman's smile widened. "That's exactly why we want you. You're not just another pawn in the game, you're the one who can change it." Keanu didn't say another word. His decision had been made. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be moments of doubt, but the choice to stand up and challenge the world was his now. And he wouldn't back down. As Keanu left the building, the weight of his decision settled in. He had chosen to lead, on his terms. The world he was about to step into was one of power, influence, and complexity, but it also held the potential for real change. His mind was clear now, no longer clouded by doubt or fear. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Driving home, he thought about all the people he had met along the way, from the cashier to the bank manager. Every encounter, every small act of kindness, had led him to this moment. It wasn't just about the businesses or the corporations, it was about people. People who had been ignored, pushed aside, and forgotten. Keanu didn't want to just be a voice for the voiceless. He wanted to build something sustainable, something that would last long after he was gone. The sun was setting as he arrived home, the city lights flickering to life in the distance. He stepped out of his car, a sense of peace washing over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. Keanu paused for a moment, taking in the quiet of the evening. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. He would face opposition, backlash, and moments of doubt. But that was the price of change. And change was exactly what the world needed. He walked inside, the door closing softly behind him. It wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning. And as he sat down in front of the window, looking out at the vast city, Keanu knew that no matter how difficult the road would be, he was ready to walk it. Because sometimes, the greatest battles weren't fought in boardrooms or on the front lines. Sometimes, they were fought in the quiet moments, when one person made a choice to stand up for something bigger than themselves. Keanu had made that choice. And in that choice, the world had already begun to change.